Okay, let's go live. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of The Dig, presentation of Sefer Publishing Group. And tonight we're going to be joined with guests John Barr and Drew Bolles, as we're going to be discussing some poignant issues of prophecy, primarily out of the Olivet Sermon in Matthew 24. So I want to thank everybody for joining us here in the chat. It's wonderful to be with you people again and to be discussing these things live. And also, I want to really give a round of thanks to both John Barr and Drew Bolles for handling the Shabbat meeting while I was gone, and for otherwise picking up the freight when the freight needed to be picked up. All right. So with that being said, tonight's presentation is going to be the sign of his coming. The sign of his coming. And we're going to be taking a look now at some of the PowerPoint, and we're going to be joined with our friends, John Barr, and gentlemen, if you want to go ahead and bring your screen in, let's see your smiling faces if we can. There we go. Drew Bolles and John Barr, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us tonight on this presentation as we discuss this. As you know, our rehearsal didn't go so well today because we didn't have one. Which is kind of consistent with the protocol of the dig. No rehearsal, and we just kind of move ahead with what we have here. But both of you, being excellent students of Scripture, are going to be able, I think, to really kind of take this apart. And of course, your poignant opinion, including dissenting opinion, is well appreciated. If you have views that are contrary to mine, that is, of course, part of our discussion. That's why it's called the dig, so that we can dig into a topic and see its corners and its parameters and get some kind of an understanding. And so with that be speaking, okay, so Sherry Slama asked the first question tonight, will you speak about the apocalypse of Peter tonight as well? Now, this is something we're not going to be dealing with, Sherry. This is going to be just some of the apocalyptic literature out of Matthew 24 and its peripheral discussion. So with that being said, let's start off with our initial verse here.
Well, it's funny, Dr. P. We might not have rehearsed, but I was led with my brother Frankie to talk about the Mount of Olives earlier this week. We actually were in John 8, though. However, we bounced between John 8 and Matthew 24. So I think the Ruach preceded us with a little rehearsal there.
Well, outstanding. That's very good to hear. And of course, that would be the way of the Ruach, to make sure that we had a little bit of pre-ammunition, if we will.
Yes, sir.
So this doesn't look completely new to anyone. So we begin here in Matthew 24:3. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the Talmudim came unto him privately, saying, tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? Now, when we talk about this particular phrase, see, I don't think that this is necessarily the end of the world, as in the termination of planet Earth, but rather the end of the world when we're talking about man's reign over the world, of the end of the world system that we currently have. And I think it is going to come to an end. And I think that's how it's going to look. So we see the Talmudim saying two questions, really. What is the sign of your coming, comma, and what is the sign of the end of the world? And I don't think that those two are necessarily contemporaneous with one another. They're jammed into the same sentence, but they could mean two completely different ideas. Now, Drew, when you were talking about the Mount of Olives, what was the nature of your discussion there?
Yeah, so obviously John 8 gets into a bit of different discussion when it pertains to his Sermon on the Mount there. But it's really potent because, in John 8, you really start to get the notion that Yahusha is Elohim. Obviously, at the end of John 8, you get, I tell you, therefore, before Abraham was, I am. And so really, obviously, in John 1, you have the establishment of he was the Word made flesh. But in John 8, it's sort of from his own mouth that he starts to profess that he is, Elohim, which is interesting when you kind of apply it here to Matthew 24 as, with the coming advent of the Messiah, it's going to be the return of Elohim to this world as the conquering king. And so it's obviously going to be something of an event. It's interesting. It's a good point you make here that it's not necessarily both his coming and the end of the world simultaneously. It will be potentially in a phased rollout strategy, as we say in software.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. It's interesting in John how potent this Mount of Olives sermon is of his.
Yeah. And of course, when we see it here that he sat upon the Mount of Olives, this sermon is typically called the Olivet Sermon because it took place on the Mount of Olives. And it's registered as well with some differentiation in Luke 21, basically the same discussion. There are some differences, but Luke 21 is the other alternative to this. And it does reference essentially the same discussion. And remember that when we talk about this, the differentiation between one gospel and the next, a lot of that has to do with the fact that the gospels were intended to be conceptualized verbally and transmitted verbally and not transmitted in writing. If the Mashiach wanted everything to be in writing, he could have come during the time of the internet and put out a blog. You know what I mean? But he didn't do that. He came at a time when there was no mass publishing going on, no mass distribution. There was no mass telecommunications. There was communications were very, very limited. And he had many of his disciples were illiterate. They couldn't read or write. And so when you see this kind of a thing, why and how is it possible that this message could spread worldwide? And the answer is, first of all, is because it's the truth. And so it has its own legs. But the second thing is that the practice of the day was an oral tradition. And what we see by this, and you can kind of see this in your own home or your own family, you sit around at the dinner table and you tell stories, family stories. Now, the stories I'm talking about, Drew. John, I'm sure you're familiar with them. When you're sitting at a table and you're telling a story and it's the old story, right? Like, for instance, the story of my grandfather. And he was having an argument with my grandmother. And he was kind of a hot-headed Italian. And he got mad. And he picked up his crescent wrench and threw his crescent wrench out the window. When he threw his crescent wrench out the window, he hit the cow in the head and killed it. It was the only cow they had. And, so this story has been told now for almost 100 years, right? And, but it's the kind of story that these are the kinds of things that go around, and some of the stories have been told so many times that your kids, oh, Dad, you're going to tell that story again. I've heard it 100. I could tell the story myself. Well, that's the whole point.
Yep.
You can tell the whole story yourself in detail and relate all of its nuances from person to person. And you'd be surprised how inside of a family, how successful that transmission is in learning and speaking it in that way. And so I think this was the original intent of this speaking and of the transmission of the gospel. And we're going to talk about the gospel a little bit tonight when we get farther into this. And so the Talmudim, of course, want to know the question that all the rest of us want to know. When shall these things be? Right? When shall these things be? And so our Mashiach is going to give us some answers. And Yahshua answered and said unto them, take heed that no man deceives you. Now, this is kind of similar to the same kind of treatment that we get in 2 Thessalonians 2, where Paul is saying, let no man deceive you that Mashiach has come, right? Don't get carried away here, but whether by word or by letter, but continue doing what you're supposed to do. Irrespective of whether or not you've heard that Mashiach has come or not come, or whether or not we're at the end of the world, or whether we're at the end times or the end days, whatever, you have a duty and a responsibility to continue to do what you're supposed to do. Therefore, do it, right? And he said, "For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Mashiach, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." Now, for me, and I'm going to talk to John about this a little bit, because he is a specialist in war. John, we hear this discussion about wars and rumors of wars. He tells us in this passage, this is going to come to pass. Wars and rumors of wars are going to come to pass before the end arrives. Now, given that your experience in war and so forth, we've been at war for a long time, haven't we? United States.
We've been at war at least. I was born in 1946. We've been in war ever since I was born. Cold War really kicked off in 48 officially. As far as my military service, I was on like 23 years total. About 8 years of that is on active duty. Every bit of that active duty was in support of some war, from Korea, Indochina, Vietnam, Cold War, which was not cold at all. I was out working in the defense industry for 12, 14 years. Got back in the reserve. 2 years later, I'm called back up for Desert Storm. Then I went to work with the Army full time on active duty and was assigned to the Canadian border with U.S. Border Patrol, drug war.
Mm-hmm.
Then, I don't know, we did some exercises over in Europe, preparing NATO for to enter all that mess of ethnic cleansing in the Baltics. And then there was 9/11. Everybody went to war. War on terrorists. And then I was in Kosovo. There's a couple others in there. They would be called rumors of war. The deployments into Korea, and my records don't say it says Vietnam no, Indochina yes. So where was I? Well, you couldn't talk about it for 25 years, any of those. The orders have no destination on them. That would be called a rumor of war. They didn't admit we were there.
Yeah, there you go.
There's a really fine organization in Udon, Thailand that I belong to. It's called the Thailand, Laos, and Cambodian Brotherhood. And we were all engaged in what's now called a secret war, because we were not in Vietnam, but engaged directly supporting the Vietnam War.
Yeah. And it was Indochina at that time, right? That was its official name.
Well, Vietnam was French Indochina. It was a French colony.
Yeah, French Indochina. Yeah.
And the Vietnamese, they wanted the French out of there. They just wanted their country back. And the UN divided it north and south, which the people in the north became communist. They were already communists fighting the Chinese in World War II. They were on our side, fighting the Japanese, in that part of the world, and they did a pretty good job of it. But the Western governments reneged on their promise that the French would be gone. And the French didn't go because de Gaulle wasn't about to give up anything. I mean, this is not just a simple war. There's a history of how these things come about, which most Americans don't know.
It's amazing how so much of this has its history based in colonization and
All of it.
colonization of, yeah.
Yeah. Right now, the African countries are still trying to kick out the French. Get out of here, because they're going over to the BRICS and being supported, not terrorized or not abused and used by the Western imperialist governments, if you will. This is Rome. This is just an extension of Roman Empire.
You bet. Yeah. And some of the rhetoric that's come out of the French colonies in Western Africa is that, okay, we've been colonized by you guys for 100 years. You guys have gotten extremely wealthy on our natural resources, and we're as dead broke now as we were 100 years ago. So
that's right.
What's the benefit of your colonization where we're concerned?
Yeah. This is the same problem Rome faced in the provinces. Germany got the best of them, and the Parthian people got the best of Rome. They lost, I don't know, 2 or 3 legions against Parthia, and at least one disappeared in the Teutoburg forest in Germany that I still haven't found. Where are my eagles? Where are my eagles? That's what Tiberius
Yeah.
One of them was hollering.
In a boat in the Baltic Sea somewhere,
You're right.
Some ghost ship, right?
But they make movies out of this stuff, But anyway.
But it is very interesting because when we talk about this war and rumors of wars concept in this particular passage, it's very easy for people to, get hit with a fear trigger predicated upon a coming war. But on the same hand, when we talk about the war that rose up that we call World War I and the war that rose up that we call World War II, World War II was extremely destructive, whether you're talking about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or whether you're talking about Dresden and Hamburg and Frankfurt, or the continuous bombing of London, or whether you're talking about the absolute bloodbaths that were fought at Stalingrad and at Kursk and at St. Petersburg or Leningrad. All of these things had a cost to them, and it brought tragedy really to most of the world. I mean, there were many, many people who lost loved ones in those conflicts.
Didn't Russia lose 50 million? What was their number in World War II?
They lost between 16 and 18 million, depending on who you talk to. But there were 5 million casualties in the Battle of Stalingrad, and there were another 5 million casualties in the Battle of St. Petersburg, and there were over 1 million casualties in the Battle of Kursk. I think it was about 1.8 million in the Battle of Kursk. And you think about what kind of a bloodbath that is. I mean, the unprecedented bloodbath we're having in Ukraine right now, where Ukraine has experienced some 500,000 casualties in 2 years. It might be close to 550,000 now that they've experienced. That's an awful lot of casualties. But you think about the fact that the Russians had 3 times that casualty count in that same neck of the woods in 1944, 1945. So these are the kinds of things that, and of course, the Russians, it's not talked about in the West. They were our ally in World War II as well, and the fact that the Russians took the brunt of Germany's thrust, Germany marched through Ukraine with 10,000 panzers. They were called, panzer is just a German name for tank. They were called Tiger tanks back then. They're called Leopards today, but they're panzers nonetheless. And the Germans approached through the Caucasus Mountains and through the underbelly of the Caspian Sea to take on Stalingrad, and they were very strong in setting up a beachhead at Stalingrad, which turned into an absolute bloodbath. Stalin was a horrible general. He didn't know what he was doing, and fortunately, he had people that were able to take the command away from him finally, and like a Zhukov there in Stalingrad, but they were sending the typical Russians. This is how they were sent into battle. There would be 3 Russian men standing there, and there'd be 1 rifle. They'd hand the rifle to the first guy, and they say, when he dies, you get his rifle. And then when he dies, you get his rifle. And that's how they went into battle in Stalingrad, with an expectation that, unarmed, with an expectation that they were going to die. And so we don't want to spend the time talking about the fact that the vast resources of the German army and its capability, particularly its ground fighting capability, was expended in Russia. That's
right.
That's where they lost the war.
Yeah, I have a couple of books that I got free at a big federal library near the university in Rostov. They have a summer sale. It's all outside. Anyway, one of the books, they're both of them in English. One of them is the memoirs of Marshal Vasilevsky, who was on the Soviet Red Army General Staff from the beginning. So he saw everything, East and West, even when they were fighting the Japanese in the Far East, and recorded it all, published this book. And American generals did not believe much of anything he wrote, because one of the things he wrote that the German fascist armies that stepped off to invade Russia, Russian Barbarossa, where it's 117 divisions. That's over 1 million fighting troops. Then you got all the support. And when you compare that with the German and Italian divisions in North Africa against the United States, Patton coming from the West and General Montgomery coming from Egypt, they defeated or chased off 17 divisions. 117 is like unbelievable, but that's correct.
A lot of people.
That is correct. That's like putting 1 million men on the East Coast. We're going to march to the Mississippi River. And among all those guys is a bunch of these tanks and guns and blitzkrieg war. You know, that's the way it was. They were headed to the Volga River. And when they took a detour, they weren't supposed to go to Stalingrad. That was not in the Barbarossa plan. It was a fluke. Hitler had a bone to pick with Stalin, and he got hung up on it. And he lost the Third German Army. Paulus surrendered. They were starving to death.
Yeah, they were starving. They forced them into cannibalism before they would accept their surrender.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think about 300,000 maybe went into prison camps. And at the end of the war, Yalta, everybody agreed to release the prisoners and everybody could go home. Stalin agreed, but then he didn't do it. He made all the German prisoners stay in the Soviet Union and rebuild everything they destroyed. Those Stalingrad prisoners, basically they were worked to death. About 10,000 of them came back to Germany. And that's sort of similar to the numbers that returned to Paris after Napoleon had the venture to go to Moscow. And the Russians say, sad but true, Hitler did not read his Tolstoy. He would not have done that. He didn't seem to know what happened to Napoleon or anybody else that invades Russia. Anybody takes on Russia, and Russia's been attacked by everybody on their border, everybody, and nobody survives. Nobody survives.
And you know, the thing is, of course, the problem is that Russia has a fourth branch of the military called the Russian winter.
Right.
And, you know, you think, oh, well, we have cold winters in France. We have cold winters in Germany. No. You have temperate winters.
Yeah.
When you talk about Western Europe, those are all temperate winters. even if you're talking about southern Sweden and southern Norway, when you get into Moscow and you're dealing with 40 below zero with a 40-mile-an-hour wind and 100% humidity, that is to the bone marrow cold.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of thing, I mean, when Napoleon came in, the Russians burned the place to the ground.
That's
He
right.
said, "You want Moscow? Here you go." They just torched it, and then everybody went back to the villages. Okay, your turn. Let's see how you're going to do in a Russian winter with no place to live and with no supply train, right?
That's right.
Very simple strategy, and it worked like a champ.
Yeah. And there's another secret they have. When Russia goes to war, all of them go to war. All of them. And there was a German general that marched into Rostov. He got that far all the way across Ukraine. It took them some months to get across Ukraine once they entered the Soviet Union because there was resistance. And they destroyed most of the Red Army units and made it into Rostov. And all of a sudden, he was there about a week, and 3 Russian armies just appeared like out of nowhere. They were partisan armies. And any soldiers that had escaped being captured in the West that made it back joined those 3 partisan armies, started closing in Rostov. That general sent a message back to Germany saying, "Hey, I got to pull out of here." Hitler said, "You're not pulling out of there." He said, "Well, I'm going to lose my army. There's all these farmers are coming at me." The whole nation rose up from the countryside. They're the Cossack country down there. And he said, "I'm pulling out." He said, "If you pull out, I'll fire you." He said, "I don't care." He pulled out. Hitler fired him. But he's probably survived to old age.
At least he pulled out with an army. Well, when we talk about this, John, and part of the reason I want to talk about these wars and rumors of wars is that there was a very interesting article on All News Pipeline written today that was talking about what appears to be a civil war rising in the United States, and the 2 real fires that are burning, causing this civil unrest, is 1, the war in Ukraine, and 2, the war in Israel and Palestine. And so what you see now, the war in Ukraine is not really we don't really have a dog in the fight, because it's not like there's Ukrainian Americans that are like uptight and screaming that we have to go after Russian Americans. That really isn't the issue. But the issue is, why did you put $150 billion into this country when we haven't secured our borders, when we haven't stopped? We didn't do anything about the environmental catastrophe in Ohio. We didn't do anything concerning the fire in Maui. And so this has got a lot of people, and there are many people who are very upset about that. They want domestic spending, not international spending. And many of them are opposed to the idea of just, mindlessly throwing military machinery into a slaughterhouse, And so this there is a substantial body of America that is opposed to any further funding of the war. In fact, it's a majority in both parties, both the Democrats and the Republicans, and the majority of the undecided voters are opposed to any further funding in Ukraine. And
the new Speaker of the House is against that.
Yeah. And of course, and the reason being is that it's my personal opinion that the candidates that are going to succeed in 2024 are not going to be supporting funding into Ukraine. They're going to have to support domestic funding. In fact, I see kind of the wagons, if you will, circling, and us going back to the idea of being America. You remember the old doctrine of manifest destiny? We were concerned with the Western Hemisphere as our sphere of influence, not the whole globe. And it's clear now that in making the whole globe the sphere of our influence, that we've really kind of overreached. We've reached into an area where maybe we shouldn't be. And I think so. There is a how do you put it? There is a mood in America that is saying, let's call all this stuff back in. let's go back to being a country and not a globalist empire.
That would be a good idea.
Yeah, so I think that might be part of it. But when we talk about the war that is raging now in Israel, we see that there have been 4,200 demonstrations worldwide, with some of the demonstrations being the largest demonstrations ever seen ever, like a 1.5 million man demonstration in Istanbul. It appeared to be about 1 million people in London, which was the largest demonstration they've ever seen in London. And a lot of these demonstrations are turning violent. A Jewish guy was killed in Ventura, California. He got hit over the head with a megaphone at a Israeli-Palestine clash-off demonstration there in LA. And so we're beginning to see passion arise worldwide now with violent events. And so we're hearing of wars and rumors of wars. I think that this particular prophecy is poignant in the respect that when you look at the idea of tribulation expressed in Revelation, for instance, that there is man-made conflict and man-made damage that occurs before the wrath of Yah. And I think that's what we're seeing here. And I think that's what this passage is saying. Drew, what do you think?
It's leave it to the Messiah to completely put the adversary's plans on blast here. I mean, he really just lays out exactly what we were going to see. And I totally agree that, I think you were kind of making this point. We've been at consistent war, maybe even before World War I. And, it's interesting. Scripture actually sort of tells us that once war begins, it never ends, right? So Genesis says, whoso sheds man's blood, his blood will then be shed. It sort of almost implies this perpetual shedding of blood, which is, obviously devastating, just to think of these numbers of millions of people dying. And then you think of why they do it. And we know, I saw this comment, and I totally agree. All wars are banker wars. They're funding both sides of these conflicts. Their end goal here is money and control and power. And to do these things for money is ultimate wickedness. And so, we clearly see that the Messiah just nails the adversary's plans to the door here for us all to sort of hopefully grasp onto. And I think they've been in action for a very long time. When he says people will come in my name, like how many false messiahs have there been over the last 2,000 years, documented, people literally saying like, I am the Messiah, even outside of our modern realm where you have these powerful oligarchs and tech CEOs and all this kind of stuff that, Elon Musk, for instance, you could see himself thinking himself as a bit of a messianic character.
Or Barack Obama.
Or Barack Obama.
Exalted as a Messiah, right?
And just like you mentioned, so we're seeing the kingdom against kingdom now too, because he mentioned specifically nations and kingdoms. And so I think this conflict in Israel is starting to exacerbate it into Jews versus Arabs. So these two kingdoms, wherever they are on the face of the earth, are now starting to war against each other, not just the independent nation states as well. And it really speaks to the men having the culmination of their works, men's works, kind of bite them in the rear end here. We have been shedding man's blood for a very long time, and Yah requires the blood of man at everyone's hands. And so it seems like war is one of the consistent things of mankind, and Yahusha comes in and sort of ends it with one final one. It seems to, that because he says here it's even the beginning of sorrows, which is interesting at the end of this verse. He's like, all of these awful things, millions of people dying, famines, pestilence, earthquakes, all of these things are just the beginning of it.
And we note here, this is a big point you're bringing up here, and I want to kind of corner in on this. There shall be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes all over the world. No, in diverse places. This is going to happen here and happen there and happen in the other place. I mean, what was it yesterday? Off the coast of Indonesia, there were 3 quakes, 7.4, 6.8, 6.6. There's 6-point quakes. This big quake that happened in Turkey, where it was the biggest quake in Turkish history. And I don't know, I forget what they say, how many dead there were.
About thousands. Or how about the hurricane that just hit Acapulco?
Yeah, that complete wipeout. That completely took out Acapulco. And so you're seeing, you're seeing these things, these famines, the pestilences, and the earthquakes that are taking place all over the world in diverse places, not worldwide in terms of everybody's experiencing an earthquake, but rather you got famine going on over here, you got a plague going on over here, you've got an earthquake going on over here, you've got a hurricane coming in. Well, the storm that just blew into Europe was a devastating storm that came through Europe, and not as devastating as that Force 5 hurricane into Acapulco, right? But when you go back to 311 in Japan, that quake and the ensuing tsunami was absolutely devastating. I've watched many films on that, and it's terrifying. I mean, there was a village up there in northern Japan where the newscasters went up on the roof of a 6-story building. They're standing on the roof of a 6-story building in order to broadcast what's coming in with the tsunami. And ultimately, the tsunami buried them. They died, and the waves overwhelmed that building. And with and the kind of flooding that was coming in, and people were expecting a tsunami like Hawaii 5-0, a 50-foot wave coming at you, right, with a big curl. That isn't how tsunamis come in. It's like you're looking at the ocean. That's its old sea level, and its new sea level is now a lot higher. And that's what a tidal surge is. That's what a tsunami is, right? Now, one thing I want to point out on this is that we have this phrase here, the beginning of sorrows. Now, let's take a look at that phrase a little bit with a little bit more detail.
I want to add something before we leave this.
Sure, go ahead.
Many come in my name saying I'm Messiah. The term Christian, I'm a Christian, is simply small Christ.
Right.
I mean, generally we're told it means somebody who follows Christ, but I'm a Christian. I'm a small Messiah.
I'm a small Messiah.
A lot of people are saying that. Many will come in my name saying I'm a Christian. And I don't think that was a good term applied, because the early church didn't call themselves that. They were in the way. And somewhere in the Acts or whatever, it says, and they were called Christians. They were called Christians, but it doesn't say who called them Christians. They didn't call themselves Christians.
That's right.
Somebody else put that label on them as a mockery, and it stuck and becomes the follower of Christ. But in the beginning, it seems to me that it was a mocking moniker. That's just in passing. But then there's what follows wars. I don't mean skirmishes. I mean devastation. Is famine, pestilence, and then the animals come in. You can't bury the dead fast enough. That's going to draw in animals, and because it's free food, they're going to eat the corpses. They're going to dig up the corpses. It's imperative to get those out of there or have them buried. And we do that in our Army. And personnel units have grave registration squads that go right in behind the front, mark the dead, mark the graves that have been hurriedly buried by the frontline units. But you can't bury all of them. And what are you going to do? Bury the enemy? No, they're going to bury their own, try to evacuate them. Mark the graves and come back in later when the shooting stops in that area to get the bodies out there and bring them home. That's why so many come home in a closed casket, because they've been laying around for a few days before the units that do that came in and recovered the bodies. You cannot embalm a body that's already begun to decay.
Right.
So it's pretty gross. But those deaths and corpses and pieces of corpses, you don't get all the parts, are laying out there decaying. And that's pestilence coming out of that. And then
Yeah,
the scavenger,
lots of
animal.
diseases come from the dead bodies lying around. You bet.
That's
And of
right.
course, and not only the dead bodies lying around, which are full of the bacteria and whatever disease that person may have been carrying that were latent diseases.
Yeah,
And they're picked up by birds and they're picked up by other animals. They're picked up by
horrible.
rabbits,
It's
squirrels,
just
rats.
horrible. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
like the movies. It's nothing like the movies. In the movies, you can't smell anything. It's not realistic. But some of those pestilence and famines and maybe even earthquakes, I don't know, will follow on in these war areas. There's got to be a stink in Gaza right now that's unbelievable.
Right.
People buried under all that stuff. Anyway, that's just some side thing. This is only the beginning of sorrows. Let's really write it. Let's paint the picture. It's horrible.
Yeah. Well,
And
let's
it
take a
might
look.
be in your neighborhood, you know?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, that's right. Now
I
let's
mean,
take a look at this phrase here, the beginning of sorrows. Okay. The beginning of sorrows. Now, this phrase in this passage here, all these are the beginning of sorrows. In the Greek, panta de tauta arche odinan. Now this odin here is this word odin here, and it means a pang or a throe, especially a birth pang, right? So
yeah.
this passage could read, all these are the beginning of the birth pangs or the travail of labor. It could read the same thing. It's not just, and so this is part of the reason why we look at this. Sometimes it's worth it to look at the underlying Greek, because it's not just people sitting around in sorrow going, gee, I'm sure sorry about these things. No, this is a discussion. All these are the beginning of the birth pangs. And so we talk about that. Take a look at this, right? This is out of First Thessalonians. But of the times and the appointed seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you, for yourselves know perfectly that the day of Yahweh so comes as a thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, as travail upon a woman. So we see here that Mashiach is trying to give us a clue that when you talk about this travail of a woman coming on, that you can tell that this is coming because you have wars and rumors of wars, you have pestilence, you have earthquakes, you have famine in diverse places. When you see these things coming on, then you're on the verge of course, this proclamation of peace and safety, which of course has been made in the Middle East, repeatedly. And in particular, we have this little issue of the Abraham Accords. Now, Drew, do you know anything about the Abraham Accords?
Yeah, right. So ushered in under 45, and it was pretty seminal in that area, as it's just been, as much as you refer to the um, powder keg of World War One. I mean, we're sitting on a arguably bigger powder keg over in the Middle East, and so the Abraham Accords, right, was an attempt to draw peace lines between nations who have historically, like, not just been at war but hate each other vitriolly, openly, and they were always drafted on tenuous grounds, and you can see them eroding immediately at the very kind of first sign of struggle. These things have sort of been flown out the window.
Yeah, they've been pretty much tossed. Now, I mean,
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia. I mean, I think the signatories included Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and some of the other emirates in the region, and they've all tossed them. They've all tossed them as a result of the Gaza incursion. They've all tossed them, and again, there was this idea that under Trump, it was successful for Israel to say, well, now we have peace and safety because we have them in a covenant with the many, if you will, a covenant with the many called the Abraham Accords, the Abraham Accords. Now, Trump, we have to keep in mind, is now suffering, political persecution in the United States. He's not just the political opponent of Joe Biden. He is somebody who is a threat to the entire nation and is being persecuted for even pursuing any political path whatsoever. which I find is very interesting because when we look at what took place in Brazil, for instance, between Lula da Silva and Bolsonaro, Bolsonaro, when he came to power, he imprisoned Lula da Silva, who was his political opponent, because he was somehow a threat to the nation. Well, he was a threat to the nation because you obtained political power and you disagreed with him. Zelensky in Ukraine has completely shut down all opposition, period. He shut down 7 major television stations. He jailed all his political opponents and criminalized any political party that was opposed to his political party, saying, basically, you're engaged in treason by having an opinion different than mine.
He just canceled the elections too.
Yeah. Well, and he's canceled the election now. And of course, he had to cancel the election in order to preserve democracy in Ukraine. That's what was happening there. And and we see the same thing here going on in the United States. We've now entered into this path where the political opponent is now considered a criminal for having an opinion different than the ruling party. That is a very alarming situation. But you have to remember that the architect of the peace and safety was Trump. And when he came into this business of the Abraham Accord, he was being compared to Cyrus the Great. Right?
Well, he got a coin. He got like a coin minted after him with his likeness on it, and like it was unbelievable idolatry, to say the least. It was very unsavory as a believer to watch that kind of stuff go down.
Was he being proclaimed as a Messiah?
I mean, at least a type and kind, if not more so, but at least a type and kind of a Messiah. Absolutely.
John?
There's something else here I'm seeing. I don't think Trump thinks of himself as a Messiah. Doesn't think in those terms. But anyway, he created, or under him was the Abraham Accords. They cannot leave anything of him remaining. They have to destroy everything.
Good point.
They're going to take anything that he got any credit for has already been destroyed. And this is one of them. And Democrats always start the wars. Always. Go back and look who was in the White House when this started and that started. But they created this. I guarantee you, they set this up probably through Iran. Selling a lot of money over there from the time of Obama. In Iran, everybody knows Iran has funded Hezbollah in the north and Hamas in the south. All these weapons, everything has all come out of Iran. Even Yemen, the Yemeni problem down there, the Saudis know it was Iran, and that's what upset them. As Iran now has Saudi Arabia bracketed, north, south, east, and west. Some of the Iran's on the northeast, but Hezbollah and Hamas are what they call them. They're armies that belong to Iran. They're funded by Iran.
Yeah, proxy armies.
Yeah, proxy army. And we did the same thing in Ukraine. We started that. When I was in Kosovo, that's why I figured out we started the Kosovo. The war's in there. We did that. When I decided I'm not going to work for the Department of Army anymore, I'm going to transfer to the Department of Interior.
Get over to the Department of Peace for a little bit, John.
All right, but I'm retired. I don't belong to any department now.
Yeah, now I belong to a department store. Yeah.
This is very dangerous stuff, but in the end, all of the evil is still orchestrated and part of Yah's plan. He's going to drag these people into the Red Sea and drown them in the end. And I think one of the things I think started is the beginning of the end of Islam.
beginning and the end of Islam. That's a very interesting equation, because I really have a question about this. I talked with Steve Benoon about this last Thursday, and it was a very difficult discussion because, here you have Benjamin Netanyahu, who is quoting scripture for his ability to go down and drop bombs on women and children, and okay, I mean, these are Amalekites, so they all have to die. Or, Joshua was told to kill every man, woman, and child, dog, cow, sheep, and everything else. So we have to do this. And, and quoting this kind of scripture out of the OT is a very dangerous thing because on one hand, I mean, and believe me, I think you guys know I'm not a Muslim, right? You guys know that. I'm not a Muslim. And I've had some very good discussion with Muslim scholars, and there are some very intense Muslim scholars that are absolutely well versed in the Quran, and they're well versed in other ideology as well. But the Quran has its own difficulties, and of course, part of this difficulty, and it's the same difficulty that you see really with the Old Testament, and this is part of the reason why we as believers in Mashiach, we really center on and focus on his work in the kingdom, because his work took us out of the difficulty of misunderstanding that existed prior to that. And where's the central tenet of this? The central tenet of Mashiach lies in the doctrine of forgiveness, right? I was thinking about this morning. Paul says that above all these other things that constitute the faith, there is nothing greater than love in the central part of the faith. And John says, this is how we know we are of the faith, when we love one another, that we express love towards one another, and our embodiment as a person is the expression of love. Now, the doctrine of love becoming so dominant in the NT and the Gospels and this kind of teaching that is coming out of Mashiach is an extremely important point, because this idea of love and forgiveness, you see, if you're in a situation where you're living under Mosaic law, okay, you're living under the Torah, at least the Pentateuch Torah. If you're living under this kind of a Torah and you transgress, the solution is for you to die. If you don't keep the Sabbath, or you gathered firewood, or you did something like this, you cursed your parents, the solution is death. Now, under those circumstances, I don't know how people live to see 30 years old, quite frankly. I don't know how they did it. I think the only way they did it is that a lot of stuff wasn't noticed. They didn't get caught, but
there's a precept of like a ransom too, which isn't deeply described in scripture, but it does speak in a couple of places of the Tanakh of being able to ransom the penalty, and so sort of like defer the death penalty under the it would be under the guise of a council, under the elders would be able to sort of stay a death penalty potentially. To your point, because everyone would be put to death, really.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's another side to this. I think we've hit this before. These people that came under Mosaic law in the wilderness, there's another reason for that, because everybody that came out of Egypt didn't make it. It was the next generation. And that next generation was probably one of the most formidable armies in the world under Joshua, and had the task of cleaning up Canaan. They just didn't finish the job. And that was a matter of do what you were told to do. This is something people in nomadic cultures understand, because if somebody gets too lax, it threatens the entire group. The only other place I know this exists is in military. You cannot have somebody in your unit that's going to be goofing off. And it depends on what unit. I mean, the closer to the front those units are being trained to be in, the tighter they are as an organization and a group working together. to keep each other alive and inflict more pain and agony on the enemy than the enemy puts on them. That's how the war is won in the front. You make the other people suffer more than you suffer, and you inflict more pain on them than they do on you. Whoever puts the most lead in the air is going to win. Simple as that.
Right. There you go.
So, I mean, this is plain raw survival. Once a war is in your face, there isn't any more talking. There isn't any more nice guys. If you want your family to survive, or your neighborhood or your community, somebody has to do the dirty work. And they had they had 3 million people coming out of the desert. And then this is another thing about that group. When they were camped out at Gilgal before Jericho, clearly Joshua was like, how are we going to do this? We're going to take Jericho. And that person, that individual, appeared to him in the camp with a sword drawn. And Joshua confronted him, who are you? Are you for us or for them? And the answer was neither. I'm not for either one of you. That's irrelevant. I'm here because who are you? I'm the captain of the hosts of the Lord. Who is that? Who is the captain of the army? It's the heir apparent to the crown, to the throne.
Mm-hmm.
That's the unincarnated Yeshua. Came with the directions of how Joshua was to take down Jericho without a shot being fired and kill everybody and everything. I mean,
Well, again, I mean, when we talk about this, John, this idea of killing everybody and everything, when you mention that Islam is going to come down, is the world going to revolt against the Bible?
I hated him doing that. I hated him saying those things. I hated that. I totally agree with your point, Dr. P. I just saw that as like, oh great, now they're going to censor the whole thing. Like, here it comes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very strong possibility that this will come, that the Abrahamic religions are going to be considered by the worldwide climate as nothing but foundational to war and destruction. Now,
are they not? Are they not? Look at the history. And who are they fighting among themselves? Muslims against Christians, Christians against Muslims, Jews against this and that. It just goes on and on.
Yeah.
I think all three religions are at risk because of this behavior.
That's right. I agree. And all three are at risk because of this behavior. Now, let me just say this, because this is something that Yah was kind of feeding into me today. Because I was wrestling over this point last night, all night long, really. And Yah said, okay, now you need to take a look at the world without it. You need to take a look at the world without the teaching of Mashiach. Take a look at that world. Take a look at the world without the redemption of Mashiach. Take a look at what that world looks like. Now, that world is going to be subject to absolutely catastrophic failure and complete collapse. I mean, that's what will happen in that world. Because when you talk about a world where you say, okay, well, look, and believe me, I've been in many debates with many atheists. I used to hang out with atheists when I was in my 20s, and they were all well-articulated atheists who could argue for days on and on and on and on. And, their point of view is that, well, you could have a robust agreement of ethics between people. We can agree not to kill one another. We can agree by contract. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. That's an out and out lie. That's absolutely not true. And the fact is that if you do not have an absolute foundation authority, a supernatural authority that is superior to mankind, telling you you shall not kill, telling you you shall not steal, telling you you shall not commit adultery, telling you you shall not bear false witness. If you don't have that supernatural authority, then you have no foundation for any ethics whatsoever. And as soon as you remove the supernatural authority over ethics, then you end up with might makes right, period. There is nothing else. As Thomas Hobbes once said, the natural condition of man is in a perpetual state of war. Man wakes up, and I wrote about this in one of my doctoral theses, is that if you look at the situation, this is what happened with Abraham. When you look, if you take, let's take a very primate world, okay? You've got one guy, he's walking along, you got another guy walking along. And so you're out there, you're hunter-gathering, right? And so maybe you make room. This guy gets a deer, maybe you get the moose, you make room for each other in the field where you're hunting. And maybe you make room for each other while you're gathering. All of this goes well until one guy gets a wife. Now, when one guy gets a wife, now he has something to protect. And now, because he has something to protect, he is at war with the other guy. And so this is part of the reason when Abraham approached Mitzrayim, he said, oh, this is my sister. Why? Because if he had approached with his wife, there would have been an assumption that he was at war with them. And he even says it. He says, look, I'm going to tell them that you're my sister. Otherwise, they're going to kill us both. Why would they do that? Because there is an assumption when he shows up with his wife that he has something to protect. Now, it's the same thing when you take the same guys in the field. You got one guy living on one side of the valley, another guy living on the other side of the valley. This guy starts to plant a garden because he's got a wife and children. This guy sequesters chickens, right? This guy isn't doing that. This guy over here, he's got no wife, he's got no kids. He's a hunter-gatherer. And what does that mean? Anything that moves, he can kill. Anything that's edible, he can eat. And that means your chickens, and that means the food in your garden, right? And so very quickly on, we have might makes right. We have a condition of war. And if you look at the political state, the political condition of every nation assumes the truth of Thomas Hobbes. The assumption is that we're at war with every other nation on earth, and the only way to keep from actually being in a kinetic war is to posture with such strength that they don't dare do it. And so this kind of approach then results in military buildup, constant vexation, always the challenging of the challenging of borders, the restructuring of alliances, one nation. Yeah, and if you ask yourself the question, why does there always have to be a war? Because there is always somebody trying to move against the assets of someone else.
Oh, covetousness.
Yeah, and so when you see something like the BRICS, confrontation right now, let's see. When you look at what's happening with them, the proposal from Russia and China right now is that let's live together in a family of nations, understanding a multipolar world and a family of nations. Well, again, we saw this same kind of discussion in the diversification of American society. Let's diversify American society because diversification is best. But when you're telling that, when you think about that idea, think about going to your wife and saying, we need to diversify this marriage a little bit by bringing in other people. Well, what are you telling your wife when you say we need to diversify? You're telling her she's insufficient. And it's the same thing you're telling your culture. We need to diversify our culture. Why? Because our culture is insufficient. Our culture is diseased. Our culture is weak. Our culture is not correct. Our culture is not the best it could be. Well, really. And once you do that and you diversify it, then you diversify it, and another culture that is stronger seizes the reins of control. And then they become a singular culture that's not willing to diversify. And this is what you see in the Islamic world. And the Islamic world, and the way it's moved into France, the Islamic world, the way it's moved into Germany, the Islamic world, the way it's moved into the United Kingdom. We're not going to diversify into your Christian culture, your Anglican culture, your Episcopalian culture, your Protestant culture. We're not diversifying into that at all. We're retaining our Islamic fundamentalism. You conform to us. And so this is the kind of reign. Now, I've got a question up here, and let's deal with this question a little bit. Ash Racha, F-O-G, writes, during the reign of Christ, will we have to come to God through the Israelites? And the answer to that question is categorically no. And when you talk about the Israelites, a lot of this depends, again, words have meaning. And so a lot of this depends on how you define this. When you're talking about the remnant, you have to keep in mind, and this is something I want to try to make a point to when we get back to this too, that people say, well, the Jews are the chosen people. Well, there's prophecy that looks to the restoration of Yasharel and the restoration of the Holy Land. But there's big questions about who that is and where that is. Big questions, number one. Number two, when we talk about this restoration, before that restoration, there is something that happened. Go back and look at Jeremiah 3. Jeremiah 3, the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom, were divorced from Yahweh. He divorced them and pushed them out into dispersion around the world. And what does he say in Jeremiah 3? Your sister, the southern kingdom, Judah, Benjamin, and the half tribe of Levi, are an even bigger harlot than the northern kingdom. And so when you get to 586 BC with the destruction of Solomon's temple, let's smell the coffee here. Let's look at the forest for the trees. The Ark of the Covenant was removed. Solomon's temple was burned to the ground, and the kingdom of Yahud or Judea came to an end. The kingdom of Judea was not recreated. A Roman prelate that they extended over the Hasmonean kingdom that was run by the Maccabees. And by the way, the Maccabees still have a hand in the Hasmonean kingdom. That's why there's an Armenian quarter in the ancient town of Jerusalem. The Hasmonean kingdom did not call itself Judea. It did not call itself Yahud. It called itself the Hasmonean kingdom. And so this Hasmonean kingdom was not Judea. So Judea was never reformed after 586 BC, and the Ark of the Covenant was never in the temple again. It wasn't in the second temple, and it wasn't in Herod's temple. This is why anybody could walk through the veil into the Holy of Holies, because the Ark of the Covenant wasn't there, which is why you could have usurpers pretending to be Levites that weren't, because they could get away with it because there was no accountability at the temple side because the Ark of the Covenant was gone. Now, it doesn't mean that temple wasn't there for a purpose in order to put everything in motion for the time of Messiah. It was. But the point I'm making is that the whole of the house of Israel was cast off by 586 BC and sent into captivity and dispersal all over the world. And once that occurred, there was no salvation for mankind. There was no salvation. Mankind was cast into condemnation and damnation because there was no redemption available for mankind at all. Only with the life and the death and the resurrection of the Messiah do we get a reclamation and a restoration of our access to the Holy of Holies. Only then. And when he walked through that gate, when he came out of that tomb, that restoration wasn't just to the house of Yasharel. It was to every single human being who has human DNA. Every single human being evidencing human DNA now has access to the throne of Yah. Do we believe this? Drew, do you believe this?
Absolutely.
John?
I believe that they have access, but I also believe they're not all going to take advantage of it.
Oh,
a free
I
gift.
totally agree with that. Sure.
So all of what you just described was in the plan before the foundation of the earth.
Yeah, agree. Totally agree with that.
So there's no mistakes in what has happened in the past. Everything happened exactly the way it was. In the fullness of time, Mashiach came. The promise, the son of the promise showed up. The seed of the woman showed up. And Yasharel is the seed of one woman, Sarah. Yasharel came from her. There's something weird about that situation. So all of the sons of Abraham are what? It's not relevant. I mean, it's nice that you can say you're a son of Abraham. However, it's the line of Sarah's son that brought the Mashiach,
That's right.
that
That's
opened
right.
the door for all the other sons of Abraham to walk through if they
That's right.
choose.
That's right.
They
That's right.
choose.
And
You're
to choose to walk through. But it's not, even though the door was open to everyone, the door to the Holy of Holies was open to everyone. You still have to choose to walk through that.
There's a caveat.
Yeah.
Salvation is free if you accept it. And after that, you got to follow me. He said, follow me.
Right.
And become a disciple, become a student. You got to, and that doesn't mean sit down and listen to what the book says from somebody else's doctrine. That's not his doctrine. The word is his doctrine, all of it. He was from the beginning, in the beginning, and he'll be there in the end. Same guy that stood up in front of Joshua and said, I'm not for either one of you. I'm for the boss. I'm here for the boss. I'm going to tell you how to take that city. And I'll be with you the rest of it. But they didn't finish it, did they? But that's part of the plan. He knew when they left Egypt, this group is not going to make it. He was going. Y'all was going to kill them all and start over with Moses. Remember?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, what's going on here? See, my thinking is still. I still have a problem with my thinking because of being in Protestant religions, Protestant doctrines, Protestant churches. But once I began reading the Word and seeking the Holy Spirit to be the teacher, which Yosha said, he's a teacher. Don't call anybody rabbi.
Mm-hmm.
Don't call anybody father. Then, I mean, I remember the first time I went and questioned the Presbyterian pastor about why doesn't our church follow some of these things in the book of Ephesians? And he stood there looking at me like, why are you 14-year-old kid asking me the doctrinal question?
Right. You need to
Because I read the book.
John.
I just come from a week of young people's whatever over in Texas, and we studied the book of Ephesians. And in the end, his answer was, well, our doctrine, church doctrine, doesn't include some of that, and some of it doesn't.
Yeah, which means that you have religion that's contrary to Scripture.
Right. And I said, do you mean that we only believe part of the Bible and other parts of the Bible we don't believe? Is that right? It's like, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, right. I talked to this pastor. I said, well, what do you think about this stuff? He said, all that stuff was nailed to the cross. I said, how much was nailed to the cross? Are you trying to tell me that all the teachings of the Messiah were nailed to the cross? Yes. Everything prior to him being nailed to the cross was nailed to the cross. Any teaching, any stuff about, those who teach the Torah will be the greatest.
Wild.
And all that stuff was nailed to the cross. Because why? Because God is fun. Right? God is fun. This was the doctrine of this church. Now, I
Right.
But anyway, but the thing is, let's get back to the scripture here. We
Anyway.
see when Paul's talking about peace and safety, when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction, as travails upon a woman with child. In other words, the destruction is going to come on like labor pains. And those of us who have kids, which is all three of us, know that when the labor pains start, they don't let up until the kid's born.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Okay,
it's going to continue
worse and
till
worse. Yeah.
And and they shall not escape, but ye, brethren, are not in the darkness, that day should overtake you as a thief. So it comes as a thief in the night to those who are not aware, those who are not of Mashiach. It's going to come as a thief. We never expected this. What are you talking about? It's like, for instance, right now, I mean, I'll just tell you, I see Jerusalem being surrounded by many, many armies. By Jordan, by Egypt, by Iran, by Iraq, by Lebanon, by Yemen, by Syria, by Turkey, even by Russia. And, and now that they're being surrounded, that, there's, we're going to get to that, right? Let's
flee to the mountains.
And, and I got to say, now I'm going to say this to you too, John, because you mentioned this too. Now let's take a look at this, for instance, here in Revelation, where we're also going to see reference to travailing. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven. This is the September 23rd, 2017 sign, right? There appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Now, there's been some interesting work that has been done in our research team. And Eileen posted this concerning this constellation called Virgo. Virgo was not always called Virgo, but was called Virga. And it actually is referred to as Semeiach and as the branch and so on and so forth. And that this idea of, Spica holding the sheaf of barley in her hand, all of this becomes when you go back and you look at the Arabic language for these stars, and you look back at the ancient language for these stars, for this constellation, we see something that is pointing directly at Mashiach. So this is, you can look at it and say the Virgo, the Virgin, if you want. That's the way it's conceived right now, but that's not always the way it was understood. However, when you see, and she being with child cried, travailing in birth. Once again, we see this sign showing that this labor pain is coming on, this labor pain. Now, since September 23rd, 2017, it's been nothing but labor pains. It's been nothing but labor pains. And pain to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. And his tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered to devour her child as soon as it was born. Okay. Now, you mentioned something here, John, and I want to get to it because this is going to come up here in this Matthew passage. So now Mashiach tells us another sign that is this indication that this labor has begun, right? Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted and shall kill you. And ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Now, this affliction is now coming on the earth. Now, I don't know, and I'm gonna try to express this. I don't want to try to scare everybody. I do want to express this so that people know. There's been a lot of discussion in the secular world about a tyranny coming over the United States. And it's going to be a tyranny that could be as harmful or more harmful as was Stalin's tyranny over communist Russia between 1929 and 1953. And Stalin killed 66 million Orthodox believers in that period of time. Okay. He was by far the worst genocidal butcher in the world. He even exceeded Mao, who killed about 50 million of his own people. But Stalin killed 66 million of his own people in his quest to absolutely put out any fire of belief in the Orthodox faith. He knocked all the crosses off all the churches, turned some of the major churches into bowling alleys, tore down Christ our Savior in Moscow to put up a swimming pool, on and on and on. These kinds of things happened. Now, when he did that, you can see that there were many people that were afflicted for the faith's sake. Now, there is no one in the Western world that has ever lit a candle or said a word about these 66 million dead Orthodox in Russia. Nobody ever talks about it. Nobody raises it. No church comes out and says, what about our dead brethren who were believers in Mashiach that died on a wholesale basis? I mean, there were stories that were taking place in Russia. To give you an example, at one point, Stalin put 20,000 prisoners on a ship, and he was going to ship them out to Siberia via the northern route, via the Arctic Ocean. So they left Arkhangelsk, and they're going to go off the Arctic Ocean all the way around to Magadan, and then beach in Magadan, and then kick the prisoners out. They got iced in. They got iced in the Arctic Ocean, and the boat couldn't move. And every one of those prisoners froze to death while they were starving to death in the hull of the boat. And it was so horrific, all of the crew committed suicide. That's how horrific it was. Stalin would do things like he would take a trainload of people, and he would say, okay, your destination is a gulag in Siberia. And he'd put them on a train, and it'd be 8 days or 10 days on the train, going out, going east. And then they'd come to some spot in the middle of the taiga, and the train would stop, and the guards would say, okay, this is your gulag, get out. Build or die. We don't care. But you're not leaving here. See you later. And then the train would go. And they're in the middle of nowhere. You know, I mean, you're talking something like a 500-mile walk to something else. So they either built something to live in or they died. And, you know, I had a very good friend of mine in Washington who was born in a gulag. He was born in a gulag in Russia. So, you know, you cannot leave out this affliction, right? But now we have this prophecy here that says, they shall deliver you up to be afflicted and shall kill you, and you shall be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Well, you guys don't know this, but there was a recent bill that was just passed in Washington, D.C. 70 Republicans joining the Democrat majority to build a building for the FBI that's going to be larger than the Pentagon. Now, we all know that the FBI is a very corrupted organization. It is a weaponized partisan organization that is doing the bidding of the corporatocracy that currently runs the United States. Now they're going to have a building larger than the Pentagon that's going to include so many employees that, you know, welcome to the KGB, right? Welcome to the KGB. Welcome to the Stasi. So we are about to go into an era of absolute tyranny with a huge, huge secret police that is going to be all over the country, and they're going to be executing not only by digital means, tracing your, you know, and of course there's more discussion today as well that the internet is going to be given over to the FCC to completely control, so that when the FCC has control, it can simply monitor speech using AI, that any speech that appears anywhere on the net via AI that's contrary to approved speech gets automatically censored. It's just blipped. It's just terminated. It's whatever. And so we're going to see very quickly now that there's only going to be one form of speech that's going to be available on the internet. There's only going to be one form of speech that's going to be available in video form. There's only going to be, you know, all of your digital access to the world is going to be completely conformed and completely censored and completely massaged, and that anyone who is outside of that is going to suffer affliction and persecution. And you can rest assured that the children of Yahweh are the ones who know the name. Now, when he says that people are you're going to be hated of all nations for my name's sake, what do you think that is? What do you think that is? And many shall be offended and shall betray one another and shall hate one another. Oh, it wasn't me. Oh, we're going to kill you because we know that you're a child of Yah. Oh, it's not me. It's Dr. P. He's the one that's been touting this name. It wasn't me. And you can find him at an undisclosed location, you know, somewhere north of the border, right? And
that makes sense why you're in Alaska.
Yeah, of course, right? So here's what we find. We find that this kind of betrayal is going to go on. This went on in the Soviet Union, you know, like you would believe. You get in a fight with your neighbor, you write a letter to the GRU. That guy expressed capitalist beliefs. I heard that guy praying. I heard that guy, that guy has a Bible, right?
Well, they just primed these pumps with C19, did they not? Just getting neighbor to turn on neighbor, turn each other in, and tattle on each other, and all this nonsense.
Yeah, I know. And then of course the contact tracing,
Mm-hmm.
and of course I had to go to my default phone number for all the contact tracing, 867-5309, which, as you know, is now unlisted, right? But the thing is, and then it says, and many false prophets shall rise and deceive many. Now, I'm going to tell you, I heard a prophet, somebody was, and I'm not going to mention her name, but she was a prophet prophesying about, how Gazans deserve death and so on and so forth. But the key is about her prophecy is that she came out and she was prophesying in the name of the Lord God, right? Now, I can tell you that my research is showing a whole bunch of stuff. For instance, Lord is not just Lord, okay? But Lord had a particular meaning. It meant Baal Zephon. This is where you first see it in Exodus, Baal Zephon. And this Baal Zephon was an Egyptian name for Zeus, who in Latin is Jupiter. And Jupiter is the statue that the Vatican holds out and says, oh, that's really Peter, when it was really Jupiter. And so when you're saying Lord, you don't realize this, but the God you're referring to when you're using the word Lord is Baal Zephon, i.e., Amun-Ra, i.e., Zeus, i.e., Jupiter. And then when you're talking about the Lord God, God, of course, is Isaiah 65 telling you that God is a Babylonian deity of fortune or good luck, right? So I'm going to prophesy in the name of Baal Zephon and luck, who is the God of luck, God of good fortune. So this is my prophecy coming to you now. Now, I mean, for me, I hear this stuff now. When I hear this stuff now, it's like, okay, look, I'm not going with you on any of your prophetic utterances. I'm not going with any of it because you are prophesying to Zeus. You're prophesying to Baal. You're prophesying to Gad and many, as it says in Isaiah 65, to fate and fortune. That's what Gad and many is, fate and fortune, right? And so this is the kind of thing where people say, that's just, those are the names that we've been given. Who gave you those names? Who gave you those names, right? The same people that gave you Eli Zeus in the New Testament, right? And the same people who carefully considered the name that they were going to introduce in the New Testament as Ea Zeus, that became Ea Sus when they wanted to disguise that they were talking about the son of Zeus. And the reason they did that is because they wanted to integrate the faith of the Mashiach into Greek mythology and into Roman mythology. You've got to remember that when Constantine created Christianity, he got out a great big crock pot and he stirred in the stuff. Let's put some Dagon in there. Let's put some Isis in there. Let's put some Mithras in there. Let's put some, Isis, Horus, Seth in there. The IHS that still appears all over the Roman Church. Let's put that in there. Let's put a little bit of Greek mythology in there. Let's put some Zeus, some Jupiter in there. Let's put some Apollo in there, some Athena in there. Let's put all of that in there. Let's put the Semiramis Horus or Semiramis Tammuz combination, the mother and baby. Let's put that in. Let's get that combination in there. And let's stir it all up and we'll call it Christianity. Well, they can do all that, but all that foundational work that was done in the Constantinian principles was all done to create religion, most of which, just like John was saying before, when he went up to his pastor and said, why aren't we doing this stuff in the book of Ephesians? Because we only follow some of the Bible and not all of it. We disregard the stuff we don't like, right?
Which is a direct contradiction of the Messiah, which is wild.
A few years later, that pastor and two of the elders came to our home. My father was a senior elder, clerk of the session. We were founding members, family of that church. My mother got in trouble because she was teaching Sunday school, and she gave a class on the gifts of the Spirit. My goodness, you thought she'd crucified Messiah. And they actually came to our home, and thought they were going to just meet with mother and dad, but all of us were in their living room. It was very uncomfortable for them. And they said she can't teach that stuff because it's not Presbyterian doctrine. And Dad said, well, it's in the Bible. And they said, well, you know what, blah, blah, blah. And if she insists on teaching things that are not doctrinal, she can't teach anymore. And the end of it was, then y'all have to leave the church.
That's where it ended.
Yeah, well, almost, because they were looking at Dad, and they said, what's your family going to do, John? And he said, they can all speak for themselves. So he went around the room. They had to ask each one of us, and each one of us said, suck it up, man. We're out of here. Now, the purpose of that is that those people separate us who are believers. They cannot stand you. And so when you get people throwing rocks at you, it's time to leave. You don't have to press your case. I don't have anything to prove to them. And my belief is my belief. And I'll share that with whoever I decide to, whoever crosses my path, that has ears to hear and lets me in the house, so to speak. That's the one I share with. But the ones that turn me away, he said, knock the dust from your feet and go to the next town.
Well, I mean,
don't waste your time with unbelievers.
Well, yeah.
They'll come around or they won't come around. Somebody else will come behind you. Don't die on this hill, stupid. We're not supposed to die for him. We're supposed to live for him.
Yeah, amen.
He died for us that we might live and eternally live. So this other religion tells us I got to go martyr myself. Well, that's stupid. I'm not going to do that. Who would do that? An idiot. We don't martyr ourselves in battle. We plan how to kill them. I mean, I'm talking spiritual stuff, not necessarily.
It's very true. I mean,
physical stuff.
Patton's remark, you're not here to die for your country. You're here to make the other guy die for his country.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. And we'll sort this out when it's over. In this scripture here, it says right there, but he that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved. This tribulation that comes on the earth, and even maybe in some of our neighborhood, maybe in our house, maybe we die. So what?
Mm-hmm.
To live is, what is it? To live is Christ, to die is gain.
Yeah, there you go.
But don't run out into the street and try to stop 100,000 people demonstrating in the behalf of Palestinians or Hamas or against Jewish people, or even burning the American flag. Burn it, I don't care. But, there's a time when you will know we better leave.
Well, yeah,
you better go to the next town.
One has to be as shrewd as a serpent and as peaceful as a dove.
That's right.
But let's take a look at this. So here we have this phrase about the false prophets shall rise and deceive many. then it goes on to say, and because the transgression of the Torah shall abound,
Yeah.
the love of many shall wax cold. Now, this is, I think, a very causative statement. This is cause and effect, because what does John say in 1 John 5? He says, sin is the transgression of the Torah. Paul even talks about it. He says, if there's no Torah, there's no sin. There's just a bunch of people running around doing animal stuff, right? But because Yah has come out and defined sin and said this, look, when you think about it, look, let's go back, okay? You go back to a pre-Torah world, right? And so, what was the sexual practice? Oh, anything. There was nobody saying no to anything, right? So it was anything. Anything went. And so, so Moses has to come in and say, hey, look, you can't marry your sister, and you can't marry your mother, and you can't marry your mother-in-law, and you can't marry, and he had to lay these rules down. You have to, no, this is no, that's no, this is no, that's no. These are things that you can't do. So this becomes a definition of sin. And John, it's in the New Testament, in the Gospels, in the epistles, where John says, hey, the transgression of the Torah is sin. And so here what we see, Paul is saying, because of the transgression of the Torah shall abound. Everybody's engaged in sinful behavior. And this is the case in the world today. People don't care. When you think about, for instance, the trans movement, right, which is like the trans movement was for decades defined, for practically forever, defined as a mental disorder. In the DSM-4, it's defined as a mental disorder. But now the trans train has left the station and everybody's getting on it, right? And now, people are demanding, trans rights. So we want trans rights. Look, even the local football team here in town, the guys are showing up in pantyhose and high heel shoes. The football players, right? And because they're demanding trans rights. Well, this transgenderism is specifically denounced in the Torah. It's called an abomination. You shall not do it. You shall not do it. It's called an abomination. Well, we don't read the Torah, so what do we care? Well, then you don't know if you're engaged in sin.
Well, but it was nailed to the cross.
What's that?
Oh, but it was nailed to the cross.
Yeah, or it was nailed to the cross. Yeah, that's another one, right? But whether or not, even if you say it was nailed to the cross, what we're seeing here, what Paul is telling you, look, because sin shall abound, because transgression is plentiful, and that's what's going on in the world right now, is transgression all over the place. The standard behavior, the normal behavior of a human being in the Western world is transgression to the Torah. The normal behavior is transgression. So as a result, guess what? The love of many waxes cold. Because they have engaged in this behavior, they don't know why they're getting colder and colder and meaner and meaner. They've got no idea. They don't know why they're getting cold, why they're getting cold-hearted. And it's because they're engaged in sinful behavior. And that's why their life has gotten cold. It's lost its heat. It's lost its passion. And it's lost its ability to love one another because you've grown cold, because you're a sinner. What do you care? You're just into your sin, right? Now we get, but he that sure endure to the end, the same shall be saved. And the Besserah of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world. Now, let's get to this point, because I think this is we got to get to there. We got to get there at some time. And the Besserah of the kingdom shall be preached in the world for witness to all nations, and the end shall come. What then is the Besserah? Now, let me show you the place where the word Besserah, and the only place where the word Besserah appears in this context, is in the Old Testament. And here we see it quoted in the New Testament when Mashiach picks up the scroll of Isaiah to read, as was his custom in the synagogue, here in Luke 4. And he says, the Ruach Adonai Yahweh is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the Besserah. He has anointed me to preach the Besserah to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, the recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of Yahweh. Now, he doesn't talk about the vengeance. he leaves off the vengeance part because he's here to talk about the Beserah. He's here to talk about the seed of the woman in Sarah. In Sarah. In Sarah, the line of David who were exilarch kings, kicked off the throne because of the transgression of Manasseh. The kingdom of Yahud ended permanently. The temple destroyed. The Ark of the Covenant removed. All of these things happened. But by the seed of the woman in Sarah and the seed of the woman and the seed of Yah in Miriam, the son is born unto us. A son is born unto us. A child is given. You right? And because of this, this is the good news. And then what happens? He has been anointed to preach this to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, the recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those that are bruised, and to preach the acceptable year. So we see here some very critical, if you will, values. Okay. Mm-hmm. So what do we see? We see healing, deliverance, recovery of sight, and that's spiritual sight, right? Mm-hmm. That's not just physical sight, that's spiritual sight.
Yeah. Each one of these is physical, spiritual, and mental.
And mental, yeah. And so here
all
we
of
see
it. Yeah.
Healing, deliverance, recovery of sight, and liberty. These things are what is being brought in the good news of this restoration. And the restoration is what? What is the restoration? It is the kingdom of Yahweh on earth. And it is deliverance from the carnal flesh. Because in the carnal flesh, you are ruled by men. In the carnal flesh, you are ruled by sin. In the carnal flesh, you are ruled by death. In the carnal flesh, you're ruled by the threat of death and disease and famine and plague. But in the spiritual kingdom, you are ruled by Yah. And you are not ruled by death. And you are not ruled by the fear of death. And you are not ruled by plague, famine, starvation, or anything else. You're not ruled in any of those ways. You are at complete liberty because you live in a different kingdom. You live in a spiritual kingdom, a kingdom of truth.
Yeah, that kingdom is within us. And the power of the Spirit gives us authority over ourself. I am not my own. And that's fine. See, we don't think like that without him, without this message. We think, oh, it's all about me. But when we get out of that by believing this, Paul said you got to be in bondage to somebody or something. You might as well be in bondage to Yah.
Yeah, amen.
My burden is light.
And my yoke is easy, right?
Yeah, I mean, what am I doing all this work for? Why don't I just surrender and believe and follow him, and the rest of it just falls into place, sort of. I don't know.
There it is. Let me give my blessings to Michael Findlay. He's in the chat here. And Michael, I just wanted to say hi to you. And we spent time together in Portugal, and so this is the first time I've had a chance to talk to him. And
sounds like an Irishman.
Give my greetings to all of those that are in your flock, if you would, and my greetings and my blessings. Okay, all right. So here we are now. We see this aspect, and I think you're right. I mean, like, it's much better to be a servant in the kingdom of Yah, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And and so let's keep going here. But now, when we look at this here at Yeshayahu, we see a little bit more that's involved, right? Because he says, yeah, the recovery of sight to the blind, the opening of prison to them that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of Yahweh, and the day of vengeance of our Elohim, to comfort all that mourn, to appoint unto them that mourn in Zion, to give unto them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the ruach heaviness, that they might be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of Yahweh, that Yah might be glorified and not someone else. So, in addition to seeing this idea of we've had the binding up of the brokenhearted, we have liberty to the captives, recovery of sight, opening of prison to those that are bound, right? We also have Comfort here is being given, right? Beauty is being given. The oil of joy is being given, and the garment of praise. See? Now, how does this equate to this idea of the Besarah? Well, the Besarah, all of this stuff happens because of the reconciliation of Yahusha. Okay? And this is the promise given in Leviticus 17:11. This is the promise given to us that the fact that Yahusha would look, think of it. I was talking about this in Yadan and Nami today. I was talking about these ideas. Let me give you an example. At one point, one of the characters is talking to Nami, and she says, "Look, in our belief system, the name is Yahweh. Now we see in the Hebrew that we have Yah, Yahu, Yahuwah, Yahusha. These are names that are relative to Yahu, Yahweh, and so. But in the ancient Gaelic, it was Yao, 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 and it was spelled Y-A-O. And Adanya is explaining it. She says, "Look, this is a triadic expression, not a Trinitarian expression, but a triadic expression in this respect. You are to love Yah with all of your
mind, body, and soul."
Right, mind, body, and soul. So we see this idea of mind, body, and soul, and you can kind of put this in some kind of a triadic expression, maybe 3 dots, but you can see that this idea of mind, body, and soul. So, like for instance, Albert Einstein, he used to have the equation E equals mc squared, right? And so you had energy is equal to matter times some constant, matter at some rate of speed, right? But there's something missing in this energy and matter equation. What is it? It's consciousness. Where's the intelligence? You try to say, oh, consciousness doesn't exist. Okay, prove it. No fair use in consciousness in your attempt to prove it, right? Consciousness is axiomatic. It's fundamental. It's self-existent. It's self-explanatory, right? And so because of that, we hold these truths to be it's self-evident. That's the word I'm looking for. So what you see is when you talk about this idea of mind, body, and soul, we're talking about this idea of a triadic expression that is in Yah. Now, when we talk about, let's take this triadic expression in all of creation, right? We see a couple of things. We see a triadic expression in the idea of the greater light, the lesser light, and the stars also, right? That's a triadic expression. But when we look, is there consciousness in the universe? Well, it sure seems like there is, because everything is perfectly in place, right? It points to, and the guys who used to do intelligent design, there's very little. In fact, the guy who did the research on Stonehenge was completely blown away when he found out that Stonehenge, all of the stones together expressing 10 circles, expressed a single algorithm. And when he looked at the algorithm and compared it to the orbits of the planets, it was accurate to the 3rd decimal point, a single algorithm. When he realized that the planets were in place around the sun in accordance with a single algorithm, he said, this is not possible in a randomly created universe. Not possible. Impossible. Possible only in a specifically created and designed universe. So the universe gives glory, right? The heavens declare the glory of Yahweh. They declare the glory. They declare not only the glory, but the intelligence, the consciousness of Yah. All right. Now, what about the soul? And so Adanya explains to Nami the soul. She says this. She says, look, there are things which you cannot touch. There are things which you cannot see. There are things that you cannot taste, you cannot hear, you cannot feel. For instance, truth. What's truth look like? What's its texture? What's its shape? What color is it? What color is the essence of life? What texture is it? What shape is it? What form is it? What dimension is it? How about the meaning of words? What's that look like? Right? So when you're talking about truth, life, and meaning, None of these exist in the material world. They exist only in the soul, only in the ruach do they exist. You see? And so she says, you have these invisible properties that are around you that you can look and you can see. Why is it that the sun shows up in the morning and goes to bed at night? Why is it that the moon appears in a moon cycle? Why is it that tides come in and come out? Why is there, where does the wind come from? What is the authority behind these things that you cannot identify? You can, what is the source of a wind moving? Now we might be able to figure that out scientifically now, but the fact when you're looking at it, you can't see it, you can't perceive it. And so the kinds of things that in this triadic expression, we begin to see that the Ruach HaKodesh has this idea of mind, body, and soul. Okay, so if we take mind, body, and soul, now look at the expression of Yahweh. At some point, Yah is going to have to be expressed in bodily form. And this is the center of the faith. The center of the faith is that Yah himself is a consuming fire of consciousness that pre-existed everything, made flesh in a body. And from this flesh proceeds the Ruach HaKodesh, the holy breath, the sacred breath coming from both the Father and the Son, that gives us expression and teaching and counsel as to the things we cannot see.
What does Paul say? The invisible things of Yah are clearly evidenced from the foundation.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. From the foundation, and clearly evident even to those who are denying him. Right.
It's actually one of the things that, so my kid, when we talk about Yah, he's like, what is Yah? It's hard for a child to grasp the concept of the ever-consuming fire. And he's like, he's like, well, how do I know he's real? I'm just look around. Just look at everything. Look at the way that this world functions. Look at every little thing. Look at the way bees work. Look at the varieties of apples that exist. Look at birds and the way that they look, like the beauty that they are, but also the shape that they're in to fly. Like these things cannot be accidents. These things cannot be anything else other than a designed creation by the Almighty. And it's one of the ways that I'm actually able to, with my child, to point him to the Father, is by his creation, because it so clearly evidences him. And it's so funny, there's a number of different scientific theories that they actually have to preclude. So it's favorable Earth positions, one of them. They have to preclude that as a solution to their problem. Otherwise, it's so evidently the solution. So they're like, we're not a favorable Earth. The Earth's not in a favorable position. Therefore, it's not in a favorable position. And they do this so many different times to make their theories work.
That's assuming that there is no creator, we've concluded there is no creator, right? Yeah, that's the thinking. Okay, well,
not logical.
Yes, exactly.
It's not logical at all. That's stupid. You can't fix stupid, right?
Well, it's wild because it makes so much sense to these people, and maybe I was even there at one point where this whole evolution nonsense kind of stuff, and not that Yah can't make his creation adapt to things, but the Big Bang garbage and all that stuff makes so much sense to them. It speaks to the deception. You go in Matthew 24 and also in 2 Thessalonians, the deception is so prevalent that well-meaning, intelligent people are completely bought into it, which is wild, especially for us in the faith, where those things are clearly evidenced, or it makes so much sense to us because it's the truth. We know it's the truth, and yet people are. It's really sad. It's honestly heartbreaking how it is. To me, it's a bit blasphemous, to just deny Yah his credit for everything that is around us, and then not only to deny it, but to say that it's just random happenstance and nearly meaningless is heartbreaking. And it's heartbreaking how many smart people are so bought in.
And when
it's a massive blasphemy, because they worship the tree of knowledge, and it's their own knowledge. It's not anything really smart, because all of these theory is not a fact until it can be proven. And a lot of them, they can prove it in a laboratory, but they can't prove it out in the dirt.
Yeah. I mean,
They can't prove it. Evolution is not, you can't prove that.
Well, you can't even do an experiment. I mean, the experiment would require you to create a new universe. That's
Yeah.
the experiment.
There's a joke about these scientists decided they could create human being from dirt, and they did it. And they said, "Hey, we can do this. Let's talk to God. Look what we did. We created human being." He said, "All right, let's do a test. You create yours, and I'll create mine." And they started to go to work, and he said, "Wait a minute, you got to use your own dirt. Can't use my dirt."
Yeah, don't touch my dirt. Yeah, and it's the same thing with Yuval Harari, right? Noah Yuval. He said we're gods now because we've created life. Well, yeah,
Good luck.
Yeah, but let's do this now because we're closing in at the end of the program. So I'm going to take a few minutes. I'm going to thank you, John Barr and Drew Bolles, for being such great guests in discussing of this aspect. And I think we've, of course, we've had, we didn't get into the, doom and gloom aspect, but we don't need
my shovel.
we needed to discuss, we needed to discuss these things that we did tonight. Okay, so let's see if we've got any questions that are going to come up in the chat. Let's make a little bit of room for questions and see who is going to. What do you got going on there? What is it? You got a shovel there, John, for the dig?
Yeah, I brought my shovel. I need a bigger one now. Need a backhoe to do some of this stuff. But it's fun, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. And I hope that we've been a blessing to. I hope we've been a blessing to the group, and that we've been a blessing to the subscribers and those who are going to hear the video. Our object here is not to lord over or to look down or to demand or to gain dominion over people, but just to share what it is, share our views of Scripture and why the Scriptures say what they say, and to have these kind of candid discussions at a time that are really troubled times for many people. They're troubled times, and in these troubled times, we want to continue to be those who will endure. And there's reasons why we should maintain our faith, notwithstanding the fact that Christianity and Islam and Judaism may all be criminalized in the very near future. They may all be criminalized, and the Bible may be banned worldwide. So, you want to get your written copy very quickly so that you can put it into a lockbox somewhere in your cave so that you have it. You don't want to be stuck in a world that's like the Book of Eli, right?
One of the
things about this chaos, or this time of troubles, if you will, coming up, tribulation, and the possible destruction of religion as we know it sets the stage for the Antichrist person to rise. You cannot rise without the stage being set, and that would be total chaos wherever he shows up, wherever that will be, because he's going to come with a message of, I can fix this. And everybody will be ready for somebody who looks like they can really fix this. And that's not Donald Trump. Somebody else we haven't seen yet, but they're going to be very convincing. And many people will be deceived by that, even believers. They're going to fall for it.
Yeah, and that's coming quickly too. But Drew and I were talking here about the Book of Eli here, John, and you've seen the Book of Eli, Drew, have you?
Yep.
Yeah, and in that, that story, it basically is that there's a guy that recognizes if he only had the Bible, he could run his, that's a post-apocalyptic world. He could run his community if he only had the Bible. And he's willing to kill and do anything else he can to obtain this Bible. And the only Bible in existence is the one that Eli is carrying. And of course, you don't discover, well, I won't give the whole story away, but
Yeah.
the underlying premise is that before the apocalyptic world arose, the Bible had been banned and all scripture had been burned. And they had moved into a world where they wanted to get rid of everything, right? They wanted to get rid of everything. And so as a consequence, that's what took place. Okay, so here we go. We got some questions. So I want to touch on one here. So Tony Green asks, who is Yehuda or Yehuda? Yehuda. Now, when we talk about Yehuda, this is, you've got several things, right? One is that you have this son of Yaakov named Yehuda. And he was, I believe, the fourth son of Leah. And it is said in Genesis 49 that he should always have the scepter in his hand and a lawgiver between his feet until Shiloh comes. And Shiloh, of course, was the kingdom of Yah that came with Mashiach. And from that point forward, the scepter would be in the hands of Mashiach and the lawgiver is between his feet. And so when you talk about Yahudim, you had a couple of things. So first of all, the kingdom of David was not called Israel. It was called Yahud. The kingdom of David was called Yahud. And in the Latin, you see there's Judea, but it was called Yahud. And so people who were prophets of Yahud had the last name Yahu. So Yeshayahu, Obed Yahu, Yirmiyahu, Zachariahu. 167 times you find the Yahu at the end of the name of the people of the kingdom of Yahud. And the people who were of the kingdom, who had citizenship in that kingdom, were called Yahudis or Yahudim. And the Yahudim came to a complete end in 586 BC. There were no more any members of the kingdom of Yahud or Yahudim. And so all you had after that was the tribe of Yehudah. And then the question is, who was this tribe and where did they get dispersed and where'd they go? Well, they were taken into Babylon. Now, a lot of people think Babylon was in Iraq, and I don't think so. I don't think it was. I think Babylon was actually in Africa and below the equator, in fact. And this is why they came back. When they came back from Babylon, they had changed the calendar to the first day of the year in the 7th month instead of the 1st month, because that would be the planting season if you're below the equator. So the modern day Jews are people of the Jewish faith and only the people of the Jewish faith. Many of them try to claim that they have DNA that links them back to David or links them back to something, but they can't prove that because we don't have any DNA from many of those people in the 1st century. More importantly, we'd have to have DNA from somebody prior to 586 BC, which no one has. So essentially what they have is they have a lineage claim, but they don't have any proof of the birthright. In fact, even Ezra couldn't find Levites, and that was only 75 years after the destruction of the temple. So when you talk about Jews, Jews are fundamentally of the faith of Judaism. So there's no fake Jews. If you're a member of the faith of Judaism, then you're Jewish. If that's your faith, then you're Jewish. I mean, that's the way it is. Now, the question is, somebody asked another question down here that says this, let's see, it's right. Don't go to, wait a minute. Let's see. Boy, it leaped on me, and so now I'm going to have a hard time finding it. Somebody asked me about, let me see if I can find it just a minute. Yeah, okay, we're coming to, okay, so Mark asks, your thoughts on the, no, wait a minute, let me look on just a minute. Let me go back up. Where was it? Okay, well, here's another question, and I'll just throw it out here. Could Jacob's trouble refer to the coming war of the 144,000? Well, I don't know if there's a war of the 144,000, but Jacob's trouble, of course, is Jacob's trouble. And of course, this is a question of whether or not we're in Jacob's trouble right now. John, are we in Jacob's trouble right now?
Probably. It looks like they are.
Yeah, they're in a trouble period. Yeah.
Yeah, they're either, I think they're probably facing Psalm 83.
Yeah, the Confederate nations.
And probably the surrounding nations, the governments might not do anything. Excuse me. But the jihadis will come out of all of those nations bordering Israel and try to make they could be incited to make a confederacy and attack from all directions. I think they will lose. Not necessarily because Israel has got a good army or anything. They're going to lose because Psalm 86, 83 says they're going to lose.
Yeah, well, I can tell you I'll tell you.
All of these Islamic armies, Gog, Magog, the 200,000 million from Asia and all this, they're going to lose.
Okay, well, let me just share this with you. The way it stands right now, Hezbollah has been given very advanced Chinese and Russian anti-ship missiles. And the Russians have said, quote unquote, remember the Moskva. And then you may or may not know, but the Russian flagship in the Black Sea was called the Moskva. And it was blown up by the Ukrainian troops using British cruise missiles early on in the war, in the Ukrainian war. And the Russians are looking for the opportunity to use a proxy to sink the Elizabeth II aircraft carrier or an American aircraft carrier. And Nasrallah has openly said, we're going to use these weapons against you. We're going to sink your ships. And so I think the only thing that's keeping this war at bay right now is the fact that Hamas is actually inflicting major damage on Israeli troops. This is not being broadcast, but Merkabah tanks are being destroyed in Gaza. The information I have was that there were over 100 Israeli soldiers caught in a single tunnel, wiped out with one RPG. And so, there's a lot of damage that's going on in Israel right now that is more than what the eye meets. Now, in addition to that, recent Israeli reports are that the people that were at the decadent party that was supposedly attacked by Hamas may have been shot and killed by an Apache helicopter governed by an Israeli who was targeting Hamas, but under their rules of engagement allows them to shoot anybody that's collateral to that Hamas agent. And so they opened up on Israeli territory against those people. And that the vast majority of those people killed at that party were actually killed by an Apache helicopter and friendly fire. Now, in addition, the story about the 40 babies being beheaded, burned and beheaded, was an admitted lie. The woman who told admitted that she lied. And that most of the people that were killed in that kibbutz were killed by an Israeli tank that was firing on Hamas members with tank shells. So a lot of the impetus for this war and the tragedy that was the loss of life in this first day on October 7th was self-inflicted friendly fire. And so this is something to think about. Now, in terms of the Israelite-Hamas war and in terms of the children of Yahweh and Yahusha, we are children of Yah, and we are called to a way of life that is not in Babylon. And so much of our life, I mean, none of us have, we're not there. None of us were in Israel in the last 2 weeks. I mean, some of us may have been, but none of us were in the battlefield to be able to verify any of these things. What we have is we have a digital feed telling us that this is what is going on. And in this digital feed, there is a divisiveness. And in fact, when you look at the kind of thing that's being preached night after night after night in the mainstream media, it is division, division, division. Mm-hmm. You should hate your fellow American that holds this view. And he turns on a different channel that says they should hate you because you hold that view. And none of these things are consistent with the position of Yah. And the consistent position of Yah is that we're called into a seeking after righteousness. Be holy, for I am holy. We're called into seeking after righteousness, and we're called to have respect for one another and to be a blessing to one another and to serve one another. So when it comes to these kinds of things, I mean, I can tell you that my heart breaks over the idea of how many children have died in Gaza. I mean, it's just, it's too much for me to bear. And in fact, I put up a video of a young man who lost 4 of his children. And he was there, the bomb blast had gone off, turning his building into rubble. And he survived it. And so he went there to try to dig his children out. But he didn't have a shovel. He didn't have a track hoe. He didn't have a backhoe. He didn't have some kind of a digging tool. He only had his hands. And he's trying to dig through the rubble, and he realizes very quickly, I can't lift up any of this concrete. I can't lift up any of this rubble at all. I'm never going to get to them. And when he realized that, he had to accept the fact, like Job, that he had lost all 4 of his children. And when he did, the pain was too much to bear. It's too much to bear. It's just too much to bear. How would you do it?
That's why I hate Netanyahu referencing scripture to do this. Like, he's talk about verse plucking. And to your point, which I thought was so excellent, that without the Messiah, to point you to the truth of all of scripture, you fall into this verse plucking schema of really trying to validate your own desires through the written word, and it's disgusting. What does Proverbs 6 say? Proverbs 6 says Yah hates everything that's happening right now. A lying tongue, a proud look, he who sheds innocent blood. Yah hates all these things. So why aren't you referencing Proverbs 6 and a justice of peace rather than a verse plucked out of Isaiah to justify your war? And it's disgusting. And I think it was a really beautiful point you made, that look at the world without Messiah. And I feel this, I even think the Christianity in its fallen state matters because of this point, that look at the world without Messiah.
Yeah. And that's really the whole thrust of tonight's discussion. Look at the world without Messiah. Look what it looks like. Nothing but killing.
Yeah. The reports that come to us from those battle areas, I don't believe any of it. It's all hearsay.
Mm-hmm.
It's all propaganda from both sides. I don't know if that man lost his 4 children. How do I know that? Because some newscaster put that on? Maybe he did. But way over here, I don't know that. And I say that because I've been in combat zones. And I'm seeing what's happening today. And there's a news guy standing right over there. And tomorrow his story is on the news. And it's nothing like what happened. Nothing. Totally spun to suit the newscast. And I'm telling you, I've seen this in Vietnam. I've seen it in Korea. I saw it in Kosovo. And in Kosovo, I was a reporter. I was an Army journalist on the ground attached to an infantry unit. And I went with those guys into the field, writing their story, publishing it in Army Times and stuff like that. But that job got me in the area, and I wanted to be in the area to see really what's going on behind what used to be the Iron Curtain. And anyway, I know what the news guys do. I really appreciated having a press pass because I could go anywhere. And I'm carrying an AR, M16, and 220 rounds of ammo. Nobody bothered me, and I had a press pass. It's great. Anyway, what I'm saying is what we're being told is whatever it is. But if you're not there, you do not know what's going on.
I mean, it's so true, John. And on top of that, we now have the image of the beast at work, where maybe back in the day it was your run-of-the-mill propaganda type stuff, and now we have AI being thrown into the mix, where people are just spinning up AI images to serve their current thing. And then you have this reverse AI. So someone makes an AI image, then someone says it is AI, it's not AI. So now you're debating whether the image you're even looking at is even real or not. And talk about, 7 degrees removed from actual truth. So on top of the fact that war is always propagandized, period, always, you now have this just unknown. To me, because I'm with you, John. Like it's hard for me to really get invested when I'm like, I don't even know what I'm looking at, and like I almost refuse to be manipulated to the point where like people are just putting in prompts into AI. How disgusting is this? Also, just be like, give me an image of a burned baby, and then have an AI make that and then distribute that. Like we're in Enoch's perverse generation, and all of its deeds are perverse.
Yeah.
Like we are living that.
Yeah, we're
And,
living that. Now,
and
Drew, let me say this.
go ahead, Stephen.
Well, when you talk about AI, you know that Amazon is apparently launching a chat that is going to be, infinitely more powerful than Chat GPT. And of course, Chat GPT now it has the capability. I mean, they have AI. The AI capability right now is so great that they're literally creating screenplays for movies, creating actors and actresses, and that the images are completely human and all of the escapes are completely human. You can't tell when you look at the movie that it is all AI. There's not a single person there. Everything has been created. And this is why the Screen Actors Guild went out on strike and the Screenwriters Guild went out on strike, because they're not writing anything anymore. You just plug it into AI and out comes the script. And then out comes the characters and out comes the people and out comes the visuals. Everything is all being done now. In fact, if you go and you watch the last Indiana Jones movie, you'll see an AI sequence in the opening of the movie, which is where Harrison Ford appears to be, it looks like an outtake from the original Indiana Jones, but it's like an outtake that nobody's ever seen before. But you look closely and you can see the character is not quite Harrison Ford. It's like first generation AI, but the whole thing is AI generated, that whole beginning sequence in that movie. And now we're seeing, and so now with this, and the next generation of AI is now here, right? We're now eclipsing, with Amazon's introduction of its chat feature, it's going to completely eclipse the Microsoft version by a huge amount. And so, this is going to put us all in a position where we're going to be asking ourselves the question. And this is why, literally, what does it matter whether or not the federal government controls the internet? Because you're not going to be able to trust 1 second of it. You're not going to be able to trust anything you see and anything that's being told to you if it appears in a digital sequence. You're not going to be able to trust it. It's just that simple, because you don't know, right? All right.
Can't really trust anything now. And
yeah,
let me make one point. If I hadn't been in these places in the world where wars were happening, I wouldn't know what I know now. I know what journalists do. I've seen it firsthand. I wrote my story and they wrote their story, and their story wasn't the same as mine because they don't know what they're looking at. One reason that they're not soldiers, so they make up stuff, but they have an agenda. Whoa, they got an agenda? Yeah, yes, they do. But the other thing, same thing with, if I hadn't spent 12 years in Russia, I wouldn't have any different opinion than anybody else in America about Russia. But my opinion is very different. Been there with them. And I read their book, I read their history, and it is not what our government tells us. Sorry.
That is so true, John.
It is so much. They have twisted our minds about the entire rest of the world on the other side of the planet. And people in America live in a bubble that has already been controlled by this government. And if you hadn't been outside this country for other than traveling and living in 5-star hotel, you don't see it. You got to go down in the back streets and
you have to live there. You have to live there for a while. And John, talking about that, it's like, what do you call a person who knows 3 languages? Trilingual. What do you call a person who knows 2 languages? Bilingual. What do you call a person who knows 1 language? American.
That's about it.
Hey, I only know 1. Dang it.
I'm not even fluent in English, so
I know.
but everywhere I went, I've learned what I needed to learn of their language, from Asia to Europe.
Yeah, there you go.
I got all their little travel books. I kept my little language travel book in my pocket.
Yeah.
I got stumped. I just looked it up.
There you go.
I
All right,
never
well,
had a
gentlemen,
problem.
we're going to wrap it. We're going to take a wrap, and I want to thank all the people. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions tonight. I want to thank everybody in the subscriber group. I want to thank you, John and Drew, for being part of this dig tonight and having this discussion at a time really that is a treacherous time for us all. But as we can see, those who are in Mashiach are completely at peace because Yah is our cover. He is our fortress. He is our strong tower. And he is our forward guard and our rear guard. And so that's the way it is. And we are blessed and covered in the blood of the Lamb. Hallelujah. Okay, so gentlemen, thank you very much. And the subscribers, thank you guys very much. And we will see you next week on the dig when John is going to show up with an even larger shovel.
Bigger shovel. Yeah. 2 shovels.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Blessings to everybody and shalom. Bye-bye.
Shalom, friends.
Shalom.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you again.